See, Abraham schemed and tried to get God to do something he wanted. And when God decided not to hide his plans, Abraham covered his plans up. And sometimes we pray like this because we think that our arguments will convince God. If we can just say the right things or believe the right things, then God will do what we want or we need. But Jesus actually says, and I think he shows us, that God doesn't hear us for our many words, but instead he knows our needs before we ask, right? Matthew 6, 7 to 8. And surely we see this verse in action in Genesis. We know actually that God knows the desires of Abraham's heart. And we see in the asking and the listening that we can get a glimpse of God's desire for mercy too. As we keep reading, we actually do see that God cares a lot about Abraham. Because the messengers he sent at the beginning of 18 actually go and find Lot immediately. And they go and they try to protect Lot and try to bring him out of the city. Abraham never mentions Lot, but that's where the story goes. And we kind of get a paragraph at the end of that whole story where it says, when God was, bringing judgment to Sodom and Gomorrah, he remembered Abraham and saved Lot. Abraham never asks about this, but God remembers him and saves him anyway. There's something about God's heart for Abraham to discover through this. He couldn't be vulnerable. Abraham wasn't vulnerable. But he began to see God's heart for mercy. He began to see that God actually maybe prefers mercy more than justice in some way. And I think for us, that is a tremendous reason for us to have confidence, to be honest with our requests with God. To not feel like we need to wrap up our requests in Bible verses or songs, or to wrap up our requests in the politically correct way to ask for things we want and need, but to just cut straight to the point. And there's this quote from Philip Yancey in his prayer book that we've been looking at a bit. And it says, "Some see God's omniscience as a disincentive to prayer. Why pray if God already knows? In contrast, Jesus treated God's knowledge not as a deterrent, but as a positive motivation to pray. We do not have to work to gain God's attention through long words or ostentatious displays. We don't have to convince God of our sincerity of our needs. We already have the Father's ear, as it were. God knows everything about us and still listens. Our confidence is that God knows. Our confidence is that he sent Jesus ahead. Our confidence is that he loves us even though we are his enemies, or we were his enemies. Our confidence is that Jesus died a death and he's not going to take that back. We can approach God trusting that he hears us because he came to dwell with us. He died, he rose again, and we can trust him because he sees our heart. And we can be honest because he is merciful. He loves us more than we know.